Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Welcome to this monthly webinar of the WPA, World Psychiatric Association Conflict Management and Resolution section. We are very excited and grateful that you are all here joining this session. My name is Victor Pereira. I am a child psychiatrist from Spain in New York City at Columbia University. I am a past secretary of this section, and I am excited to introduce our colleague and friend, Dr. Enrico Suardi. He's a general, so adult, child, adolescent, and forensic psychiatrist. He has medical training and specialty training in both Italy and the United States. He currently works at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C. He serves as the co-chair of this WPA Conflict Management and Resolution section. He's been the president also of the Washington Psychiatric Society, and he's now going to present about his expertise in global psychiatry, mental health, and diplomacy. Thank you very much, Enrico.
Well, thank you so much, Victor, for the kind introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. So this is my second talk in this series that we've been running for the past year. Last year, I talked about diplomacy and psychiatry about this time of the year. This talk also is part of a course that I co-teach at a local institution on a behavioral sciences in national security and public safety. I co-teach it with my colleague, Dr. Bejo Gandhi. And so I'm glad that we can continue this series of webinars with this other talk. There is a dynamic section here run by Ruda and Fabian and myself as co-chair, and others that may be on this call. So when I put together this seminar last year, not being really a subject matter expert of hostage crisis negotiation, I had the help and suggestions from some experts, particularly Dr. Robert Loudon, who was a chief negotiator for the New York Police Department. So I want to acknowledge them on this slide that you see now. So what I'm going to do today is three things. One, I will start out with a historical overview of the context and the beginnings and the early history of the field of hostage negotiation. Second, I will quickly review some of the key principles and methods, and I will highlight the psychological impact of these situations on victims, but also on responders. Third and last, I will broaden the scope of the presentation and discuss negotiation outside of law enforcement context as an emotional and rational process in a professional and personal life, and make the case for the soft skills of negotiation to be applied in everyday life. So I want to start out with some history here, and this is from a U.S. perspective, American perspective. So going back to the 1960s and 1970s, this was a time of social and political transformation, but also unrest and upheaval. And there was an upsurge of domestic and international terrorism. And, it's hard to think about it, but in the United States, between 1968 and 1972, there were over 100 small aircraft hijackings. It's known as the golden age of aircraft hijacking. Domestic incidents and a lot of other type of incidents, a lot of hostage situations. Another thing that happens at this time in the United States, unfortunately, this is considered the beginning of the modern era of mass shootings, sadly, still happening. The first of these tragic episodes occurred in 1966 at the University of Texas in Austin. A young man, Marine veteran, reached the top of the observation deck at the tower of the university and proceeded to indiscriminately shoot at passersby, killing many, wounding many more. So a lot of hostage situations, the beginning of the era of mass shootings in the United States. And so law enforcement agencies are faced with new and severe challenges. And so one response to this is the sort of hardcore hard response, the creation of the SWAT teams, special weapons and tactics units are created in this context. The first was in Los Angeles LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department in 1967. So units of specialized officers who have special training, special weapons, and so forth. So this is the hardcore response. And the the local police department take a page from the LAPD and start their own programs in the following years, SWAT programs. And so does the FBI, the federal police in the United States. And so the FBI Academy developed SWAT teams and training in the early 1970s. And now all the field offices of the FBI have SWAT teams. So that's one way to go to respond to this upsurge of challenges, right? But that's not the way I'm going to focus on, of course, today. There is another way to go that will actually come from the post-hoc analysis of multiple tragic events involving hostage-taking. And it's a different approach that will rely on the application of soft skill as opposed to the hardcore tactic of SWAT. I'm going to mention 4 events that are seminal for the development of this new approach. All between 1971 and 1972. 3 of them domestic in the United States, 1 international in Munich. So the first was a violent prison incident occurred in a Attica penitentiary in upstate New York, September 1971. 1,000 inmates riot, gain control of the prison, take correctional officer as hostages. They had valid concerns about their conditions and wanted change. But after a standoff of several days, the governor of the state of New York orders the state police to take the prison by force. And the conclusion is tragic, with 29 inmates and 10 hostages, correctional officers died. And so lawsuit will follow and will be settled decades later with a lot of money paid to the families of the victims. Another of these defining incidents, and people may know about this, but during the 1972 Olympic Games in Munich, in Germany, Palestinian militants stormed the Olympic compound and take Israeli athletes as hostages. And they have their demands, and the German police agrees to transport them to the airport in Munich, to have them transported by a helicopter and their plan is to go to Egypt. But at the airport, there is a violent confrontation that erupts with police, and again the incident ends in a massacre. All the hostages are killed. 10 of the 13 militants are killed, and one police officer. So another tragic conclusion of a very high-profile event involving hostage taking. The third episode I'm mentioning, 1972, this is a much smaller event. If one looks at the conclusion here, there's only one death. It's a bank robbery in Brooklyn, New York. It goes down in history as a bungled Brooklyn bank robbery, a robbery that doesn't go well and involves hostage taking. It will be the subject of a movie starring Al Pacino, 1975, Dog Day Afternoon. But the reason why it has a big impact is that this, for the first time, live TV covers it. And people go to observe what is going on, crowds standing around the bank branch while this is unfolding. So a lot of mediatic impact there. But the most consequential event is arguably the 1971, one of the many small aircraft hijacking that I was mentioning earlier. Now, what happens here in this case is that it's a domestic dispute, husband and wife, and basically the husband and a friend of his hijack a aircraft and while armed, force the pilot and the co-pilot and the wife is on board to take them to the Bahamas. And but they have to stop and refuel in Florida. And at this point, the authorities are notified, and the local FBI people come to the airport and block the aircraft and do not agree to have it refueled and leave the country. So, make a long story short, there is here too a tragic ending with multiple homicides and suicide. But what is important, what is consequential here is that the families of some of the victims sue, and because the FBI is directly involved, it's a federal court that deals with this. And eventually, the Court of Appeals in 1975, in the decision Downs v. US, rules that the FBI didn't do a good job and that there was a better suited alternative to protect the hostages. Now, it's exactly this better suited alternative that is the subject of this talk, and it's hostage negotiation, right? Meaning using soft skills to contain, communicate, and de-escalate with the goal of preserving human life, including the lives of the hostage takers, if possible. And I've selected here on the slides that you see now publications and quotes from some of the pioneers in the field. We're all law enforcement people, police officer, FBI officers. We're teachers and practitioners of this new field. And, these quick quotes here on the side kind of capture the essence of this new and different approach that aims at preserving human life using communication, de-escalation techniques, using time, and acting like you're paid by the hour. If you're paid by the hour, you want to clock in more hours, right? And so you're stalling for time. So the first, it's the NYPD, the New York's Police Department, that is the first law enforcement agency in the United States to move in this direction. And between 1972 and 1973, the NYPD creates the first hostage negotiation unit in the country, which is led by two kind of special cops, special officers, and then Detective Harley Schlossberg, who's here with his pipe. He had a PhD in clinical psychology. He completed a PhD in psychology while working full-time as a police officer. And the other is Frank Bowles, Lieutenant Frank Bowles here, who also got a college degree, but in criminology from the, at that time, very new John Jay College of Criminal Justice, now famous in New York. Also, while working full-time as a policeman, so studying at night. And these two put together a training program.
That's very important.
Doctor, can you mute yourself? Thank you. I had the same problem last time we had a webinar, and I'm still mortified about that. I kept talking and didn't know that was my microphone was on. Anyway, these two special individuals creates a training program entitled Guidelines for Barricaded Felons and Hostage Confrontations. And eventually, Bowles will become the commanding officer and chief negotiator for the first, for the NYPD, will go on negotiating hundreds of incidents and really saving the lives of almost, close to 1,000 hostages estimated. And the first of these incidents happened in 1973, when this is all new and experimental. It's also a robbery, but it's a robbery in a store, and the robbers and when the police responds, the robbers take the people in the store as hostages. And so initially there is a forceful engagement and a shootout that follows. A police officer actually dies on the spot. And then the police switches to this new approach that they never tried before. And after 47 hours of negotiation, everybody leaves with their lives, the hostage takers. And of course, the hostage takers are actually taken into custody, but, all of them survive. Now, among the participants in this first hostage negotiation training in New York, there are two instructors from the newly formed FBI Behavioral Science Unit. And the FBI will soon run its own hostage negotiation training program at the FBI Academy. And so I have on these slides Conrad Hassel and Thomas Trentz, who were the first chief hostage negotiator, chief hostage negotiator in the FBI, and then others here, Gary Nosner, Chris Voss, who followed in the following years as FBI chief negotiators. And the FBI, this was part of a number of programs that FBI started running those years that saw the contributions of the behavioral sciences. And the list here is here on the left and includes a National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, the Critical Incident Response Group, the Behavioral Analysis Units, the Behavioral Threat Assessment Center, just some of them active to these days. But I want to take a little step back here to say that the involvement of the behavioral sciences and behavioral scientists in American law enforcement was definitely not a new thing in the 1970s. And it really went back to World War I when the psychologists became involved in the assessment and selection of personnel. Again, World War I. And then from that, after the war, this spread to domestic security, law enforcement, 1920s, 1930s. But it's really in a civil rights era, President Johnson, 1960s, and after the work of the President Johnson's Commission on Law Enforcement, Administration of Justice, that the role played by the behavioral sciences in law enforcement is expanded to cover other areas, including consultation to organization, and leadership development, also stress management. And so we are in the late 1960s here, and this is the context in which the FBI Behavioral Science Unit, BSU, is conceived and then eventually, comes to light in 1972. And the goal is to utilize and further develop psychological and sociological understandings in law enforcement. There is a threefold mission that includes teaching, research, and consultation, meaning consultation of the Federal Bureau to local law enforcement agencies, police departments, consultation on existing cases, right? So involvement in existing open cases. In the areas that are listed here, profiling of criminals, hostage negotiation, forensic hypnosis, psycholinguistics, and so forth. And of all these, the one area that receives the most attention, for at least from people who is popularized, is criminal profiling. And so, if you recognize, it wouldn't be unusual for you to recognize, some of these movies, TV series that popularized and sort of glamorized profiling. All right, so now this concludes the first part of my talk. And as I said, I'm gonna move on and review now some methods and principles of hostage negotiation. And I have on these slides the behavioral change stairwell model that was developed as part of the FBI hostage negotiation program. Now, this is a process for developing rapport between the negotiator and the counterpart, which supposedly, hopefully, results in the negotiator being able to influence the behavior of the counterpart. There are 5 stages, and the first is active listening. That's the first step. I'll say more about that because this is really a central concept in this talk. Now, the second step is for the negotiator to convey an empathetic attitude, right, to the other side, meaning that the negotiator understands, or at least tries to understand their perceptions and feelings, where they're coming from, in a tactical way. And this is not necessarily through explicit statements only, can also be through the tone of voice, the posture, to signal interest, concern. So active listening and empathy hopefully lead to building rapport and trust. And so the conversation hopefully can be directed to reframe as positively as possible the whole situation and to explore possible common ground and possible safe facing option for the counterpart. And if and when rapport is established, then the negotiator can begin to influence the counterpart, to make suggestions, to explore solutions, to consider what the options are. And the final step is, of course, that behavioral change, which means ideally that the hostage taker surrenders and everybody is safe. Well, and this is key, in this talk, it is clear that the law enforcement people have taken a page here from our professions of mental health, from the work of mental health professionals. And actually, some of the pioneers in the field make it explicit in mentioning the work of Carl Rogers, Dr. Carl Rogers here in this picture. Dr. Rogers was a very important psychologist, psychotherapist. He was president of the American Psychological Association in the late 1940s and is the founder of humanistic psychology and is known for his person-centered psychotherapy. And he, in a paper that he published in 1957, he coined the term active listening or reflective listening. And active listening encourages conversation through the use of open-ended questions and suggests that negotiators paraphrase the understanding of the others. I'm talking about negotiators because that's what my talk is about. But of course, Dr. Rogers, we're talking about psychotherapy. So he was talking about patients, right? So can you... Okay. So this is an attempt here to identify and confirm emotions expressed by the other side and utilize intentional pauses in the conversation for emphasis. Dr. Rogers describes active listening as an important way to bring about changes in people. He says that despite the notion that listening is a passive approach, clinical work and research work in psychology shows that listening brings about changes in people's attitudes towards themselves and others. It also brings about changes in their beliefs and values. And people who feel like they've been listened to in this new and special way become more emotionally mature. This is more or less a quote from his writings. Now, if you go on YouTube and look for Carl Rogers, you'll find several video clips in which he explains these concepts. There is a 15-minute clip in which he talks about how this concept of active listening and then empathy came to be. Now, this being said, I don't want us to hear, psychiatrists, mental health practitioners to get the wrong idea, and we need to stay in our lane. Hostage negotiators have adopted and adapted psychotherapy techniques, but they have never pretended to be themselves mental health practitioner, counselors. The setting and the mission in which they operate are very different from ours. And so their ethical tenets are different. And so this is really why, we as physicians, psychiatrists, mental health practitioners should not think about acting as hostage or crisis negotiators ourselves. And simply put, the reason is that tactical response, more or less violent, but certainly confrontational, is always an option, in this situation. And there are many situations in which the negotiators lie and manipulate, even though that can have a boomerang effect. And so, but it's a means to the end. So giving false reassurance, giving false promises is, okay for them. It would not be okay for us to do. Now, law enforcement agencies have over over time, organized and reorganized their incident response frameworks, including how hostage negotiation is placed in the structure and workflow of their operations. And I have listed here on the left side of this schedule of this slide some of the guiding principles of the field. The ability to tolerate ambiguity and have patience, because time is on the side of negotiator. It's a process, and it's not a zero-sum gain process. Both sides can gain out of it, and that's how it has to be framed, right? It's a very emotional. These are very emotional situations, and the importance to read emotion, but do not be carried by emotions is key, right? It's not about punishing and humiliating. It's about reinforcing the positive, finding the positive, and disarming, redirecting, diffusing, right? It's de-escalation, but always from a position of strength, that strength that comes from the fact that the force is behind the negotiator, and that tactical, violent response is always an option. So hostage negotiation is containment by communication and de-escalation in order to preserve human life. And communication here is the name of the game. And it's not just about the choice of words, because a large part of how communication works is actually not content related. And it has to do with the volume and the tone of voice, the cadence, the body language. And even when the counterpart does not respond, they're there and they're listening. And this is what Gary Nosner, an past FBI chief negotiator, described as an opportunity to run a one-way dialogue in order to make that connection. And when the counterpart responds, then we have a two-way dialogue, which has to be utilized as an opportunity to hear from the counterpart, to hear their version of the story, to hear their grievances, their reasons, right? And in order to get more information, to understand what the motivation here. Now, listening is not a passive stance, as Dr. Carl Rogers said, and as the FBI negotiator said. Chris Voss talks about a process by which the counterpart is given the illusion to have control, why the perception of reality, their perception of reality, is slowly and steadily modified. So it's certainly an active, actually Chris Voss talks about listening as a martial art, active listening, reflective listening as a martial art. Now, communication strategies have to be tailored to the type of hostage takers, their motivation. So, and how are we dealing with somebody who's sort of purely motivated by, criminal intent, for example, extortion? Are they dealing with somebody who's politically motivated? Are they dealing with somebody who is mentally ill or even suicidal or out of touch with reality? Now, when this hostage negotiation model and trainings, become, go from the NYPD to the FBI and then all over the country in the United States, then there is an evolution also of the concept and the terminology. And already in the second half of the 1970s, the realization is that actually many of these crisis situations do not even involve the presence of hostages. And so the term in use becomes crisis negotiation as opposed to hostage negotiation, crisis negotiation, crisis intervention, because the term hostage negotiation has a narrow scope and doesn't really reflect the complexity and the variety of the situations that I have listed on this slide. And so the current literature of this field is on risk assessment and management and communication in crisis negotiation and crisis intervention. Now, there are certainly many positive outcomes, but there are also egregious examples of failures. And failure is always a possibility in this crisis situation. And I have here included in these slides and in stock the tragic events of Waco, the Waco siege that some may remember or have read about. And this was a cult situation. Cult, the Branch Davidians were an apocalyptic breakaway sect of a Seventh-day Adventist church. They, about 100 people, directed by their cult leader, were living on a ranch in Texas, and they were preparing for the imminent end of times. And they were stockpiling food and weapons and ammunition because they believed that there would be a war, a final battle between the forces of good and evil. And so they were under the watch of the authorities. And at some point, because there was a concern that they were getting deliveries of weapons on this ranch. And so a federal agency, the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, was able to infiltrate the group with an undercover agent. And they were concerned enough about the imminence of the danger that they decided to confront the cult members. And what came out of that in February 28, 1993, was a violent confrontation, and on both sides, federal agents and cult members, there were deaths. And so from that came a siege, 51-day-long siege that was led by the FBI. And eventually, on April 19th, 1993, on the orders of the DOJ secretary, that's the Minister of Justice in the United States, the Secretary of Department of Justice, the FBI launched a tear gas attack. So the SWAT team sort of prevailed in this case. And from that, a fire erupted and burned out the compound. 76 cult members, including 25 children and 2 pregnant women, died. And so here is a list, and there was a lot of post-mortem analysis of what happened, of how the negotiators that were there on site ended up being so sidelined. And so on this left side, I have here some of the problems identified by the leading negotiator for part of that event, Gary Nosner. And so there was also a congressional commission that looked at these events. And the conclusion was that the government agencies were not responsible for the tragic outcomes. But regardless, there were a lot of negative ramifications. Conspiracy theories proliferated in the aftermath of the Waco siege and its tragic conclusion, especially among far-right groups and militias. And one of these extremists, Timothy McVeigh, if you recognize the name, actually became radicalized as a result of these events. And in retaliation, he plotted and executed the Oklahoma City bombing, actually exactly 2 years after the conclusion of the Waco siege on April 19, 1995, causing 168 deaths, the worst domestic incident of this kind in the United States. And so, regardless of what the investigations concluded and the commissions concluded, FBI Director Louis Freeh, Director Freeh in 1994 decided it was time to unify command of various components of tactical response to crisis situations. And he branded this new entity in the FBI Critical Incident Response Group and put crisis negotiation. He has the credit of putting crisis negotiation from front and center at national and international level, including hostage negotiation, including the behavioral sciences contribution to this. I'm going to switch topic a little bit and cover quickly the aspect of impact on victims and also negotiators. And in this regard, it is often mentioned the Stockholm Syndrome. You're probably familiar with this concept, is when the hostages develop positive feelings towards their captors and actually side with their captors, and to the point that they refuse to cooperate with the authorities during an incident or after an incident. Now, this concept is initially comes from, the Stockholm Syndrome comes from Sweden in the aftermath of a bank robbery that involved hostage taking and went on for 6 days in Stockholm in 1973. And so the concept is initially developed by a Swedish psychiatrist, Dr. Nils Bejerot. But the term Stockholm Syndrome was coined later by the American psychiatrist Frank Hochberg, who was a pioneer and is an authority in the study of and work on clinical work on PTSD. And Frank Hochberg referenced the defense mechanism, identification with the aggressor, that was first described by Anna Freud. Now, how many people do suffer from Stockholm Syndrome after experiencing this kind of hostage situation? Well, certainly a minority. The FBI estimates is 10%, or as estimated, it's 10% or less. It has been proposed that the Stockholm Syndrome may be considered a variant of PTSD, but this syndrome has never been included in official clinical nosology. It's never been in DSM, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, of the American Psychiatric Association or the ICD. And so some have actually disagreed with the fact that it actually exists and have considered it an urban legend. But included in the nosology certainly are the diagnosis of acute stress disorder and PTSD, anxiety, and depressive disorder are commonly experienced by the victims. And also discussed in this regard is the experience of the stress of the negotiators as a result of the extreme tension and fear of negative outcomes, the practical constraints, the pressure to end negotiations, the interference by commanders. These are very, very stressful situations. And there is a cumulative effect over time for people who are in this line of works. And when things end unsuccessfully, some negotiators will experience guilt and anger and depression, and a lot of distress. And so stress management programs have been developed, and stress resistance inoculation through the participation in simulated incidents has become actually part of the training of hostage negotiator and crisis negotiator in the United States. And of course, negotiators who are able to manage their stress and remain confident in their ability and committed to their jobs, that's very important, right? And police departments and communities benefit from their abilities to handle these complex crises in a professional manner. So this is also very important. All right, now I'm going to move on to the last segment of my presentation here. As I said, I'm going to broaden the scope and talk a little bit about psychological aspects of negotiation outside hostage and crisis, outside law enforcement, outside hostage situations. So in a broad way, in professional and personal life. And I want to start from the etymology here, where the word negotiation comes from, and it comes from Latin. Now, the word otium means in Latin leisure time, free time. Negotium is the opposite. So negotium is work, is business, and negotiatio means the carrying out of work and business, right? And so if we're talking about business here and negotiation, I want to mention the program on negotiation that Harvard Law School, the Harvard University has run for many years. And it was started in the early 1980s after the publication of by Fisher and Uri of a book entitled Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreements Without Giving In. And I have here on the slides on the left side some of their sort of proposed guidelines for mutual gain negotiation. You got to separate the person from the problem. You got to focus on the counterpart's interest, not their initial position necessarily. You got to concentrate on the problem and the solutions, mutually agree on objective criteria, decide among options, escape the cycle of action and reaction. Very importantly, manage emotions, right? So this will be continued with another book authored by Uri in the 1990s, Getting Past No is the title. This is an example of a rational approach to negotiation. So emotions have to be managed so that they don't get in the way. Well, actually, emotions do get in the way in general, because human thoughts and behaviors are also driven by the emotional, more primitive and instinctual parts of the brain. And I have here, I mentioned the discipline of behavioral economics that is rooted in the work of two Israeli psychologists who actually in 2002 received the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for their work, because they demonstrated that even when we have the best information and tools, we don't necessarily make rational decisions that are based on information and rationally interested, right? emotions play a big role in our choices, behaviors. And so therefore, it's very important to have emotional intelligence also, and certainly in the context of negotiations. Now, why do we negotiate? We negotiate because we want to manage conflict. We want to solve conflict. Now this is a presentation that's part of the work done by section of the World Psychiatric Association that's called Conflict Management, Conflict Resolution. So I think we are on target here with this talk and the mission of our section. So conflict management is a process to limit negative aspects of conflict. And the idea is that if we adequately manage conflict, conflict can actually lead to positive outcome. Now, the way we negotiate depends on our style of conflict management. We can be more or less assertive. We can be more or less cooperative. We can compete to dominate the other side or avoid the situation entirely, or be accommodating and letting the other side prevail. We can compromise. It's a kind of a lose-lose situation where everybody is losing something to find the middle ground. Or we can try to collaborate to find actually mutually gainful solutions. So that's positive on both sides. But we all negotiate, not only in crisis situations, but in our lives, in our professional and personal lives every day, with family members, with partners, friends. And we negotiate with others who have very different, opposite views, but also to an extent with others who share, to a degree, our preferences and interests. We negotiate because we want to reach agreements and to get what we need through communications, not violent means. Now, negotiation is a joint decision-making, an interpersonal process that's based on communication. It's a rational and emotional process at the same time. And effective communication is based on a choice of words, but also attention to aspects that are not content-related, are nonverbal, body language, the cadence, volume, tone. And just like anything else, planning, rehearsing, to hone, to improve our skills is key. Now, active listening, tactical empathy, persuasion, that whole toolkit that the law enforcement people took from our field in the 1970s in the United States to create this field of hostage negotiation that became crisis intervention, crisis negotiation, can actually serve us well in our everyday lives, not just in our work as therapists and mental health practitioners. This is my last slide here, and it's the conclusion of the talk. And again, this talk is a seminar that is part of a course that really focuses on the human factor in our national and domestic security, and the contribution that the behavioral sciences and us as psychiatrists can make in this regard. I have here a couple of quotes here I find particularly meaningful. President Lincoln's talking about persuasion, kind and assuming persuasion to try to influence the conduct of men. And then a quote from a diplomat that I have talked about last year in my presentation on diplomacy and psychiatry, who again focuses on the human factor here. And, all these bad things that he lists here are not the product of institution, are not the actions of institution. Individuals do these things, these violent things. So the importance of the human factor here, and I think that the fact that when law enforcement here in the United States was faced with exceptional challenges back in the 1960s, 1970s, and then decided that they needed a new approach that would use a soft approach, and that they found what they needed to find in the work of psychologists, of mental health practitioners, is quite extraordinary and should encourage us as psychiatrists, as mental health practitioners, to actually contribute in a broader way to the well-being of societies. So we should definitely endorse an empathetic approach, even if it's not enough in the end, if it doesn't always score. But we should always endorse it, not just in our own practice, in our own small world, but in a broader way for the well-being of societies. Okay, and with this, I'm done with the talk.
Okay. Thank you very much, Enrico. This is great, and we appreciate that this is something that in our training programs or even like in continuous formation we don't learn about, but it's very very interesting and relevant. And I appreciate also an example mentioned how mental health, psychological and psychiatric skills can be used for things that are not therapy or healing medicine, but some cases is very important. But you also mentioned they can also be misused. I would like to give the opportunity. We still have a few minutes for people to ask questions to the chat, or if they want to unmute, they can do so. And we appreciate everyone joining here. Yes, Jibril, please.
Thank you for this timely discussion in our WDS section. Thank you, Enrico, for taking the time to put this wonderful presentation. In my psychiatry residency in Ethiopia, my thesis was on how residents would face issues of violence in the mental health ward. And they reported, we are now publishing the paper, that they had poor communications when it comes to negotiating violence and agitation in the ward. It's not only hostage taking, but also in the clinical settings where we face a lot in emergency and forensic psychiatry. And Enrico, how will you take on that, on training our residents on negotiation skills? Thank you, Enrico.
Well, I think that's something that I would certainly support and encourage. It goes back to that active listening, reflective listening, and empathetic approach, and how that works. It doesn't always work here. I have here on this slide, the position of somebody who says it doesn't really work, isn't enough, but it is to be tried. And it is to be tried and it does often work. It can be a game changer in extreme situations or very mundane situation. And I think that here, as mental health practitioners, we really have something to offer and something to be reminded of, not just when we sit with our patients, individuals and groups, but also in our everyday lives. So I would definitely agree with this being part. And this is real reason why, myself and Dr. Gandhi have put together this course and are trying to promote, I'm trying to give these talks around.
Thank you very much. And yeah, you raised a great question. Like I think probably a lot of people or everyone, we have examples of situations in the inpatient wards where like sometimes like a physical contention or chemical contention was the last resort, but sometimes they could probably have been avoided with better negotiation skills. Like a patient, I've seen cases like a patient that wanted to just to smoke. It was not violent. He wanted to smoke, and that's something because of this lack of skills. These patients ended with physical contention.
And you know, if you look at the a video clip of Carl Rogers, what he says is that it's not that difficult. If you don't know what to say exactly, if you don't, just listen, but listen attentively and reflect on, you know, what's being said and what is your understanding. And you'll see that over time, this can be transformative. Whatever the, you know, the context is, not just a clinical context, right? An everyday life context. Listen to the other person attentively, reflect, you know, what is your understanding of what they're saying. Do that in words, do that, you know, with your posture, and you'll see that can have a very positive impact on, you know, how the conversation moves along and then what the outcome is. And it's certainly and I find it compelling that it was the law enforcement people who were trying to solve a problem with a new approach, and they were looking for, okay, what is out there that can help here? And they came to find, you know, the work of a psychotherapist. So it could be the other way around, that we valuing what we have to offer, we are offering it to other disciplines and other fields and other situations. That's the point of putting a human factor at the center and talking about the behavioral sciences in security, domestic and international.
Tajudeen, do you have any question? I see you're
We're running out of time here, probably, but
we have like 3 minutes. No. So maybe also to conclude, because also you touch on this, would you like to also share a little bit or your ideas, because we have here global psychiatrists, like the ethics of psychiatrist involvement in law enforcement. We saw, you mentioned some examples, but we saw also like bad examples in terms of the
right.
breathing in Guantanamo with tortures. And here people, they have different global contexts. So from your perspective, what would you be your ideas and recommendations?
Well, that is where we have to stay in our lane, as I said, right? And not think that we can do everything here. And, you know, their ethical, medical, the tenets of medical, of ethics as physicians and as psychiatrists are well defined there. And so the positions here in the United States of the American Psychiatric Association and also the American Psychological Association and the American equivalent of the anthropologists have been very clear in the past years. So we have to be very careful about that, right? And to be clear, I've never been involved myself in any of this work, but I find it very interesting, and I find that as advisors, you know, we can play a role. We should play a role, and a positive role, and not refrain entirely from dealing with this pieces of reality, because that is also not a good idea, right? To not get involved at all. But to be clear, I've never been part of a law enforcement agency. I should say that back 25 years ago, I did serve in the military. That was mandatory in Italy. And I actually was assigned to the Carabinieri, which is a court that does domestic and international police work. And so I think that experience also has made me curious about these realities and open. But, you know, I think you're mentioning the ethics of our field is very important, because there is no way around that for us.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'll ask everyone quickly if they can also turn on their cameras for a screenshot, like a family picture. And on the meantime, very, very quickly, Margaret and then Sonam, please.
Hi, Enrico. I'm Dr. Sonam and presentation. Could you elaborate on situations where approach be more effective than the collaborative one? Even though the latter is being considered as more cooperative and assertive in the conflict management style. I'm just having this query. Yeah.
I did not understand the question. It was if it was a question or a comment, I thank you for that, but I couldn't really understand it. Did you understand it, Victor?
No, it was kind of
Maybe the connection is not good.
You can put it on the chat as well.
Yeah. Or you can email me. How about you email me? It's enrico.suardi@dc.gov. Or suardienrico@gmail.com. I'm happy to share the slides if somebody wants that, and I'll give you the PDF. But suardienrico@gmail. That's maybe it's the best. suardienrico@gmail. Okay, .com. Are we taking a picture?
Yes, please smile.
Yes,
Look at your cameras, smile.
it's the traditional family photo.
Well, this is a very good series. What's next, Victor?
So next, yeah, I think it's on the 28th.
Probably Victor's lecture will be next, I think. You are next, Victor.
Victor,
Yes.
Margaret's presentation earlier this month was fantastic.
Yes.
I got her.
Thank
I got
you.
the PDF of her. Oh, hi, Margaret.
Hi, Enrico. I was going to ask, but Victor didn't see my hand, or maybe he got lost in the conversation. I wanted to know, you mentioned a number of times that yourself and your colleague have put up a series. So I'm wondering, is this the last that we're going to see in our webinar, or you're going to give us one? This is really interesting. I've been quite informed from the two presentations. So I'm hoping that we can have another one because it's quite informative. And
we have a whole program for the rest of the year, but I hope we continue this. Next year, I can do one. We're taking turns. It's actually a very good thing that we're doing, and I think we have a program for the. We have a pause in the summer, but we'll start in the fall, and maybe next year we'll continue. And I'm happy to. And also, I'm happy to tell you more about what I do here. So, we can stay in touch.
okay. Yeah. Is there an opportunity for international colleagues to connect with or access to be part of the series? Is it like a paid program?
Yeah, let's do something together. I mean, the course that I run is 14 seminars, and but I'm happy to connect with you and others.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Enrico. Nice presentation once again.
Well, thank you. Yours was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Stay tuned. So for June 25th, and we'll send it by email in the WhatsApp groups. We'll have a presentation that I'll lead, and we'll also will be related to the role of faith-based organizations in mental health and conflict resolutions. So we'll be very happy to have you.
That will be very interesting. Thank you, Victor, for running this.
Of course. I'm going to stop here the recording.